Well, my child, I am glad you asked. Let's go. Okay. So, schizoaffective disorder used to be considered a form of schizophrenia. Now it is considered a umbrella term. A umbrella term is basically what it means is that you could be diagnosed with a disorder, but a very large amount of things could fall under that disorder. For example, autism spectrum disorder is technically a umbrella term because there are literally thousands of different variations of autism that a person can have. Which I also have autism too, which you might know what that is, but not many people know what schizoaffective is. So I'm really glad people are asking me questions about it. So schizoaffective disorder is kind of similar to both bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. It used to be considered both bipolar and schizophrenia in one diagnosis. However, because of recent changes in the medical world and also the real world, well, the medical world is part of the real world, and also the fact that scientists have noticed that a lot of schizoaffective people, they have symptoms that people with schizophrenia don't have and people with bipolar disorder don't have, such as the lack of empathy, emotional detachment, dissociation. Well, actually, some people with severe enough bipolar can have dissociation, but that's like rare. Also, some people on the autism spectrum who experience psychosis usually don't get diagnosed with schizophrenia even if they have all the traits because like autism can impact the way someone's brain processes psychosis. For me, my schizoaffective causes me to be extremely detached from people, and I also get overly attached to people as well. So I have mixtures of so many characteristics of so many disorders that I ended up falling under the schizoaffective category because doctors know that my other disabilities also impact my behavior. And on top of that, I have other symptoms that are very inconsistent a lot of the times. So that's what led to me being diagnosed with schizoaffective. Schizoaffective can cause really fast speech, really slow speech, really loud or quiet voice, lack of empathy, hyperempathy, hypersensitivity, lack of emotional range, in other words, feeling emotions, hyperactivity, mania, depression / depressive episodes, anxiety, obsessive compulsive tendencies, tics, forgetfulness, also known as brain fog, feeling dazed, disordered eating, and hearing and seeing things that aren't there, delusions, paranoia, flashbacks, kind of similar to PTSD, but it's not to definitely nowhere near the extent that PTSD is. Irrational fears, self-isolation, self-harm, anger issues, hypersexuality, low sex drive. Hypersexuality is basically a really high sex drive, and a low sex drive is obvious. For me, I kind of struggle with both at the same time. It's really hard to explain, but yeah, I struggle with both. Basically, I feel very hypersexual, but I also can't get turned on for some odd reason. I don't know why. It just kind of happened one day out of the blue when I was like 14 or 15. I was like, something isn't right. Most people with schizoaffective disorder typically develop it in their early to mid 20s, and 1 out of 200 people will develop it. However, I started showing symptoms when I was like 10 or 11, I believe. I started having hallucinations and paranoia and delusions around that time. Possibly younger than that, but I'm gonna have to ask my mom about that because my memory is so bad to where I can't remember even like 2 or 3 hours ago correctly. Disorientation is definitely a really big part of my schizoaffective disorder. I struggle with often, like I could walk through a doorway and then I'll just suddenly out of nowhere like completely forget where I'm at in a room. Dissociation, I deal with that a bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit. It's also called a derealization. And what that is that you feel like you are outside of your body and you're not really alive and that you don't really exist. Derealization, also known as it's a form of dissociation, but not to like full-blown dissociation. Like you could kind of figure out what's going on, but not as quickly. Derealization, also known as depersonalization, is a defense mechanism that your brain creates to protect itself from any physically, mentally, or sexually dangerous situations. In my case, I started experiencing symptoms of that when the pandemic hit. The pandemic did mess up my mental health a lot, and it affected a lot of people because the pandemic is considered a collective trauma, and what that means is that a collective trauma is when a very large amount of people go through the same exact trauma at the same exact time nearby each other. In this case, the whole damn world experienced the same exact traumatic event. Some people after COVID actually got diagnosed with PTSD because of COVID. I believe I ended up having a psychotic break because of COVID, because there was at one point I was so disconnected from reality that I genuinely thought that harming myself would end the pandemic. No, I'm not kidding. And I also was convinced during and still now that like people are like stalking me, even though I know logically that's not true. Personally, I believe the pandemic is what what's the word? I don't know how to pronounce the word, but like basically made my delusions and psychosis so bad to the point where I actually had to go on antipsychotics. I think the pandemic is what caused it, to be honest. Lack of contact with other people can cause a person to go into psychosis. Unfortunately, I've recently learned this, but an alarming amount of autistic people are now experiencing psychosis because of the pandemic. Multiple friends of mine who have autism ended up developing either dissociative disorders or like full-blown schizophrenia because of the pandemic. Because the isolation literally damaged our brains to an irreversible degree. Personally, I think that's what happened to me. I think the pandemic really fucked up my brain to the point where it's not able to be repaired. I have to be on antipsychotics for the rest of my life because of it. So yeah, schizoaffective disorder is it has a little bit of bipolar and schizophrenia characteristics, but it has so many things under that umbrella term. It matches up with many disorders such as BPD or NPD or ASPD, which is narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and antisocial personality disorder, formerly known as psychopathy.